Thank you so much, Bev, and thank you for convening us and for everyone who is on this call right now. I hope you're all and your families are safe and well. So I am going to focus on some major policies that New York has moved forward over the last few years, particularly in 2019. But before we move into that, just a bit of background, as Bev mentioned, A Better Balance is a national legal advocacy organization. We're based in New York City, working to support all women and working families, especially those who are most vulnerable and exposed to unfair workplace policies. And equal pay legislation is on the forefront for us, as are policies like paid family leave, like paid sick time, and the emergency legislation that we're also advocating for. All of these issues are interconnected. They all contribute to unequal pay. Motherhood, we've mentioned so many different intersections of unequal pay. Motherhood and pregnancy is another interplay in unequal pay and gender inequality. And that's something that we focus particularly on as well, in addition to inequality based on race and based on gender and based on family status. So, I encourage folks. A Better Balance has also set up a specific resource page on COVID-19 and on workplace policies that we're both advocating for and that have been passed, including New York State's emergency paid leave law and the federal laws that have passed both last week and the week prior. And if there's really one takeaway from my presentation specifically, it's that A Better Balance is here pushing for legislation, but we are also here to support workers. We have a free confidential legal helpline where any worker, if you are working in communities where folks don't understand their rights and need help, we are here to help, and we're here to try to talk workers through what their needs are and how the law may be of assistance to them. So moving into specifically the equal pay legislation that New York has moved forward, and we've been proud to lead with PowHer on. In 2019, really we saw a movement on two very major pieces of legislation. One was around expanding how we think of pay discrimination. For so long, we've thought of pay discrimination as, you need equal pay for equal work. And what we've really seen is that that's been very limiting. And what we really needed was a model where we thought about equal pay for substantially similar work, because what we were seeing in the law is basically employers say, well, if they don't have exactly the same job, then they deserve unequal pay. But we know that's entirely untrue. And we know that there are plenty of people who are doing work in very similar jobs that are deserving of equal pay, but not getting that. So a huge change in the law was to update the law to say that employers have to pay people equally for both equal work and for substantially similar work. And the second big piece of that was that we were really limiting ourselves by saying, well, pay discrimination is based on paying men and women unequally. But what we know is that people are being paid unequally for a variety of reasons. A Black woman might be being paid unequally both because she is a woman of color and because she is a woman. And so the law was updated to say you can't be paid unequally based on any protected class that you are in, comparing that to someone who's not in that protected class, which means that if a woman of color is being paid less than a white woman, that too can equal pay discrimination, because we know that race is a key factor to unequal pay as well. So that was a big change in the law too. We have that you are not allowed to be paid unequally for substantially similar work, and if you are in a protected class, not just based on sex. So that was a huge update in the law. And then a second really big update in the law, some of you may be familiar with, many states and cities around the country are banning inquiries on salary history, which means that an employer can't ask you if you're interviewing for a new job, what you made in a previous job, because we know that women and people of color historically start earning less from the outset of their careers, which means that if an employer asks you what you made in a previous job, then and for instance, they just say, well, okay, I'll pay you 5% more than what you got in your previous job, then that's going to perpetuate wage inequality, because women and people of color are historically paid less from the outset. So that follows them from job to job, and we know can be a driver of wage inequality. Now, New York City in 2017 passed a ban on asking for salary history. And I think it's important to note, it's not just a ban on asking what you made in a prior job, but it's also that if an employer is able to find out that information, they can't use that information to set your salary. So it's not just about asking for the information on an application, but an employer also can't seek that information from an outside source and then use that to set your salary. And New York State hadn't yet passed that, even after New York City did. And in 2019, thanks to the efforts of a lot of people on this call, New York State did pass a ban on asking or relying on salary history, and that law is now in effect. And we're really pleased to see and hopefully see the change that results, because that law is now in place. So those two are really the two sort of major buckets that were passed last year. And I should also flag that in 2015, there was a real concerted movement as well to strengthen and close loopholes in our equal pay laws. That was through the Women's Equality Agenda. And one particular piece of that I want to note is around salary and wage sharing among employees. There's often been a phenomenon where if employees share their salary information with one another, employers will retaliate against them or penalize them for having done that. And in New York State made very clear that you cannot retaliate against someone if they want to discuss what their colleague is making, because often that's the only way to find out if you're making less, and you shouldn't be fearful of talking with your colleagues to see if you're being paid less. And the last note I'll end on is just that A Better Balance has two resources that I would highlight. We have a New York Working Women's Pocket Guide, which is really meant to be a kind of one-stop shop for a variety of different issues, including equal pay. So if someone has a question about whether they think their rights are being violated around this, or around paid leave, or around pregnancy discrimination, the guide, and it's in digital form and is updated constantly based on changing laws, is meant to be as a resource for workers and advocates as well. And we also, I would highlight, have a specific Know Your Rights toolkit on these two laws that I just mentioned. They have very detailed FAQ sections, thinking through the different permutations of the law, the differences between the New York City and the New York State laws, as well as different examples, especially around this question around the newly expanded pay discrimination and what it means to expand based on protected classes, because that really is a novel way of looking at pay discrimination. And we want to lay out specific scenarios for how to think about that form of discrimination. So I would encourage folks to check that out. And again, if anyone has questions, obviously you can email me directly. And if you work with communities and you're hearing from workers who have questions, again, please feel free to direct them to our free confidential legal helpline.